Welcome to Oriam Unlocked, the podcast that brings you an insight into the lives of student athletes, elite performers, and the people shaping the future of sport in Scotland. Brought to you from Scotland's Sports Performance Centre, we go beyond the stats and schedules to uncover the mindset, the motivation, and the moment that define the journey. This is Oriam Unlocked. Let's step inside. Hello and welcome to the Oriam Unlocked podcast, the podcast brought to you from Scotland's Sports Performance Centre. And today I'm delighted to be joined by Professor of Exercise Physiology at Heriot-Watt University, Chris Easton. Chris, thank you very much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely brilliant. Thank you very much. To start things off, could we learn a little bit more about you? Obviously, on this podcast, we go into sport, we go into different areas, but this is maybe the first time we've actually had someone on who's involved in sport in a different way. You're on the sort of the science side, the numbers side. Could I get you to introduce yourself and your role here at Heriot-Watt?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a Professor of Exercise Physiology, but also the head of discipline for sport and exercise science. So at Heriot-Watt, we have an undergraduate degree in sport and exercise science. We have a team of academic staff who are actively involved in research and also support athletes as well. So my role is to kind of oversee the growth of all of those exciting things. And also make those connections and work hand in hand with you guys at Oriam as well.
Brilliant. What was it that first drew you into this profession? It's becoming probably a bit more common. We know a lot of people that are coming into Heriot-Watt and doing the degree, and it's becoming a bit more popular around the place as well. But what was it that first drew you into this?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. It's actually one of the most popular degrees in the UK, and it has grown over the last 30 or 40 years or so. For myself, probably like many, when I was at school, I was very actively engaged in sport. Represented the school in multiple different sports, enjoyed football, golf, basketball, various different things. Wasn't really quite sure what I wanted to do. After I left school, I was fairly good at science. I liked biology in particular. And so sports science offered a really nice opportunity to combine my love and passion of sports with something that had both a sort of scientific element to it, but also sort of, a good sort of career outcome at the end of it.
Brilliant. For listeners who may not be too familiar, how would you describe the work and its importance in modern sport? We know that sports progressed massively within the last sort of 20, 30 years, and with the introduction of things like this. What is its importance in modern sport today?
Yeah, it's hugely important, and I think as we've seen the increased professionalism in sport across the globe as well, and we're seeing more and more need for multidisciplinary sports scientists to support athletes and coaches across a number of different domains. I think in the early days it was probably very much about fitness, right? So the endurance side of things, the strength side of things, but that's absolutely diversified over recent times. And sports scientists are now involved in data analytics and looking at injury prevalence and various different things as well. So the diversity of sports sciences has expanded, and so too has the impact on the athletes themselves.
We mentioned that Heriot-Watt's on a sort of new pattern with the sport and exercise science that's came in to the university. How has that developed over these last few years? What was it that first originally sort of put it into place, and were you part of that process as well from the very beginning?
No, I wasn't. So I joined the university in 2024. The degree programme launched in 2022. And I think one of the driving factors, of course, was the fact that we've got Oriam on site, the National Performance Centre. So you had a scenario where you've got athletes, top-level athletes, various different sports, coming every single day to train and prepare for competition. But the connections with the university maybe weren't as quite as strong as they could have been. So that the concept there was, well, let's create a degree programme in sports science that brings with it the academic, the expert knowledge. And then all of a sudden you've got some really nice opportunities to connect. And that growth has been amazing. There's lots of obvious crossovers that have been established in the early days. We're now in the final year of the delivery of the degree programme. What I mean by that is we've got our first graduates who will graduate from the degree programme this summer, which is a fantastic achievement, and we look forward to celebrating their success.
Brilliant. Having Oriam on campus, would you say that's the biggest factor that makes this degree so different compared to other ones around the UK? Obviously, massive universities and they have great facilities, but Oriam being Scotland Sports Performance Centres are rubbing shoulders with the Scottish rugby team, with the SFA and things like that as well. Would you say that's quite a differentiating factor?
100%. I mean, what we have is unrivaled, certainly in Scotland, but I would argue even across the UK there are very few that have that combination of a fantastic international university combined with this world-class performance centre on site. The opportunities for our students are absolutely unbelievable. As you say, our students all do a work placement, a core work placement module in their third year. And so many of those students have opportunities you don't have to leave the university campus, and they're already working hand in hand with elite level athletes. I think there's more to it than that as well. I think the way that we have designed a degree programme is very applied. Yep. There are some sports science programmes that maybe go down more of a sort of clinical route or maybe a broader route. Ours is very focused on sports science and applied performance. And I think from that, we then can harness the best of what Oriam has to offer as well.
We have our first graduates coming through in 2026, as you mentioned. What kind of career pathways are we putting in place for these students? What can we expect over the next 5 to 10 years for these graduates coming through? Where would their career take them through this degree?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I think that's one of the, as I answer this question, is one of the amazing things about the degree programme where, obviously as the degree title suggests, a lot of our graduates will of course go and work in high performance sport. It's a very competitive landscape, there's no question on that, and many of our students will go on to undertake a master's degree and potentially some of them into a PhD programme as well, where they develop those maybe niche skills, be that in nutrition or psychology or strength and conditioning. And for a lot of our students, that's always been the intention, and that will be their focus moving forward to go and work with top level athletes. But there's more to sports science, and while we tend to focus on the sport, it's also worth mentioning that the degree is sport and exercise science. If we think about exercise, physical activity, there are many of us that engage in that not to be top level athletes, but just to be healthier, in our day-to-day life. And so many of our students will actually gravitate towards applying their understanding and skills in exercise to helping people live healthier lives. And be that in the National Health Service, you're looking at exercise referral schemes and physical activity, or in some cases working in the health service to undertake exercise testing to understand risk for surgery, as an example.
Are you seeing that become a bit more common? People from the general public maybe taking a bit more of a notice on this? Obviously at the Oriam Clinic we have sport and health testing that's been introduced in the last few months, and it's something that the general public can take part in. It is, as you mentioned, not just your high-level performance athletes. Is that something that you've seen maybe change in the last few years, where people are becoming a bit more aware?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's probably two sides to that. I think if we think about the general public and their understanding of their own health and well-being, a key driving factor there has been wearable technology, where at the touch of a button you can access how many steps you've taken that day, what your heart rate is, and predictions of various different health and performance outcomes. And so you become a little bit more tuned into, well, what do these numbers mean? How active am I compared to the average person? And maybe if I'm a little bit below that threshold, what can I do about it to get better? But I'd also say that where we maybe think about exercise testing, things like VO2 max testing, lactate threshold testing. 20 years ago, that was very much the domain of elite athletes. Nowadays, you've got amateur cyclists, you've got park runners who read magazines and online articles about these types of tests and think, I want to go and do that and see where I am and see where I compare. But also to try and enhance their own performance as well and help them achieve their own personal goals.
Brilliant. It's something I've noticed a lot more as well, just through word of mouth and people that I know who take part, as you say, at marathons, things like that, who are finding out more about their body and how they operate before they go into these things. So it's very interesting. We mentioned that it's great to find out how your body reacts, how it takes things in. What role does this type of testing play in injury prevention? Obviously, it's something, if you look at elite level athletes, it's almost top of the brain these days to make sure everyone's available. If you look at top leagues, people are now limiting minutes that played on the pitch, things like that. Training sessions maybe not as intense as they were 25 years ago when this science actually wasn't there. Is that something that's sort of came in the last few years, and it's really sort of taken the main focus of people now.
Yeah, in terms of elite level sport, particularly team sports like football, the notion of load, how much activity that a player is undertaking, and injury risk, has been doing the rounds for quite a while now, and it can be quite a controversial topic. You may recollect the controversy with Rangers Football Club, where the manager came out and said that the sports scientists advised that they rest players for the weekend based on the amount of minutes that they'd undertaken in training and competition. There was a bit of an outcry there. And then you have the other side of that, where there are players in a club who are maybe injured more regularly, and there's a bit of outcry saying, why aren't we resting and looking after our players? So there can be a little bit of controversy to that. Again, a lot of that is been about the development of the technology. You'll notice in games and in training sessions that players will wear these GPS units in the back of their shirts. And what that allows the sports scientists to do is to measure what we call the external load, so the amount of activity, the intensity, the duration of that activity that the players are doing. And there's been a lot of really good research which has looked at how that amount of load correlates with injury risk. What we understand is that it's the kind of the acute load. So if you all of a sudden put somebody through a really kind of high intensity training session where training has been quite a low intensity for a period of time, you're likely going to increase that player's individual injury risk. So I think we've got a really good sense of how to try and manage load and how to reduce injury risk as a result of that.
Do you think it's something that governing bodies will have a say on? For example, I'll give you something off the top of my head now. In the NBA, they have a 65-game minimum rule now, where if you want to be up for the season awards at the end, you have to have played 65 games. And it's been quite controversial in the last few weeks. You've had some of the top players who have suffered an injury. They're not going to make that benchmark to be part of the awards. And then people are saying, they've played more minutes than the people who have played 70 games. They've just done it in a different time. Do you feel like it'll get to a stage where you will have different voices and different backings from different people, maybe who have a bit more money in the game, or they have these people that they need to be playing to have eyes on them? Is that something that can be quite difficult to balance?
I think so, yeah. Again, we're coming up to the World Cup, right? So, one of the debates that typically happens is this idea of club versus country, where you have a player who is maybe, your most important player, so they are getting a lot of minutes on the pitch, as a result of that. And all of a sudden, because they are a good player, they're also an important player for their national team, and they go into a sort of concentrated period of training and games over a period of time as well. So, the top nations in the World Cup will play 3 group games plus, many number of knockout games in a short period of time, come straight back from that and go into pre-season, maybe having actually missed some of that pre-season with their club as well. So I think there's already that notion of how you best play that. Even looking at how you collect the data and how that data is exchanged between national teams and club teams as well, and trying to coalesce that all together. So I don't think there's an easy answer to it. The good players, managers will always want them to play, but I think then there will be the sports scientists in the background saying, hey, look, if we want this player to play 70 games for us across the season, the best way to achieve that actually is to try and get that balance in terms of where they're contributing.
Yeah, it's striking that balance. I find it really interesting actually, because I sort of cover and watch a lot of sports. You see the difference in people playing, and I think, for example, last week they were mentioning Cole Palmer, who plays for Chelsea, England international football player. I don't think he's had any time off in the last 3 years with the Euros and the Club World Cup and now this World Cup. And as you mentioned, you can end up playing 75, 80 games in a season, and it's incredible. It's insane that they can go through it. But yeah, it's very interesting, and it leads me on very nicely to my next question. You mentioned technology transforming and looking at the data and things. Is there any exciting innovations in sports science right now that's sort of getting you excited? Something that's maybe coming along in the last few years or looking to happen in the next few years that we can see a difference in the next part of this sports science world? Yeah,
I think that's it's a great thing about working in sports science, right? Which is, there's always that notion of what's the next. It could be a margin. I think we're probably into the realms of marginal gains now, as opposed to talking about sort of game-changing technology. The most recent example that for me that springs to mind is the super shoes in running. So we've seen completion times for marathon, for example, tumble as a result of the development of this technology. we're probably taking it pretty much close to the edge of what we can achieve, but I'm quite sure that Adidas and Nike and all the others are looking for that next marginal development in the running shoe. I think in terms of what's next, the technology already exists to measure in real time our response to exercise. So most of our wearable watches will allow us to measure heart rate, for example, and to collect that and transmit that data live to a coach or sports scientist that's supporting them. The next step is potentially looking at metabolic signatures. So you'll be aware of the glucose monitors where particularly for diabetics, you get that real-time monitoring of your blood glucose that links to your phone and sets an alarm to see when you're low and when you maybe take a sugar dose. But if we use that same technology and we apply it to things like blood lactate, for example, what we might be able to do is to tune into where an athlete is and help them understand their pacing and race strategy in real time, as opposed to what we typically do now, which is to analyse that data after the event's already finished.
Yeah. It might be the wrong person to ask this question, but do you think we're at a risk of over-relying on technology within sport? Obviously, sport's magical. It can be moments and things like that. Do you think there is a chance of that, or do you think we're just getting it right at the moment?
No, I think we're already there, and I think if you speak to any practitioners, again, particularly in football clubs and other team sports, that's probably one of the biggest challenges they have at this moment in time, which is we have all this technology, we have all this data. Some is probably more useful than others, but there's only so many hours in the day, and your role as a sports scientist is quite limited in terms of how you can interact and impact the performance of the players, how you can feed that information back to them and also to the coaches as well, when you understand that there's also a tactical element to that training and the preparation and rest periods as well. And so one of the things that they wrestle with is, well, what do we measure? Yes, we could measure all these other things because we can, but let's measure the things that actually have an impact on our performance. So I think we are already at that point of wrestling with too much data and trying to kind of best translate and condense it to feed back to players and coaches.
Scotland is a country that's obsessed with sport. We're football daft, we're going to the World Cup this year. But just sport in general, golf, things like that, it is massive within the country. How do you think we're positioned in terms of sports science? Maybe a little bit different to how maybe the US go and stuff in terms of funding and things like that, but how are we sitting right now in that bracket?
I think perhaps we're maybe a little bit behind where we could be when I look at the potential of what we could accomplish with a little bit more collaborative working across our nation. Almost all of the universities in Scotland have a sports science programme, which is hugely popular. There's a wealth of not just knowledge, but facilities that are there, open and able to support athletes and work hand in hand with teams. But I think in Scotland, at least traditionally, we've had a habit of being a little bit more sort of parochial in the way that we operate, a little bit siloed, where each team, each national governing body is kind of doing their own thing. What I'm seeing now, and I think in all honesty, a lot of this is about constraint and budget, where a national governing body can't do everything on their own, and they're starting now you see that kind of they're reaching out to universities or working hand in hand with others to maybe look at how they can co-develop and work a little bit better together. So I think we've got absolutely a really good foundation in terms of facilities, a really good foundation in terms of the knowledge and the expertise. And what I'd really like to see is that kind of more conjoined network, which hopefully in time we'll see a drive in performance across all different sports as well.
Do you think having Oriam, a facility like this, that's developed over the last 10 years, almost coming up to our 10-year anniversary, over these next 10 years, a hub like this could be really monumental in that change?
Absolutely. I see Oriam has been a hugely important piece to that. In all honesty, it's absolutely essential. Where if you mentioned earlier, the Scottish Rugby Union, we have the Scottish FA, we have tennis, we've got Scottish squash, all based here. If we think about all that knowledge that we have, not just amongst sports scientists, but amongst the coaches and the athletes as well, if we could look to harness that knowledge, harness the facilities and the equipment that we're using to help across multiple different sports, I think we'll really start to see that drive and performance. And you can only achieve that, right, if you have a facility which is open and usable by multiple different sports.
A hot topic right now around the world is AI, artificial intelligence, obviously for many reasons, and it's sort of taking parts of every area in life at the moment. How do you see AI helping sports science and developing over the next few years as well? Obviously, I don't want to put too much pressure on answering this question because it's a lot of the unknown at the moment for a lot of people. But do you feel like it will have a big impact on this world?
I think so. I think it feels like we're a little bit at that early stage yet, understanding how to use it and what the potential of that may be. I talked to you earlier about the amount of data that we're generating or that it's possible to generate, even from GPS units. It's measuring so many different things. The time that took traditionally to analyse all that manually and interpret that on a player-by-player basis. All of a sudden now with AI, you've got that at the touch of a button. So what maybe took several hours now takes seconds to do. So I think it's already been harnessed in a sort of positive way to support performance in that side. In academic, I think we're still a little bit scared of it because now where students were forced to go and think for themselves and to undertake academic work, again, touch of a button, they can generate coursework and assessments with support from Gen AI. So I think we're still kind of wrestling with the positives and how to do that. But I think, absolutely, when it comes to data, the potential of how that can be used, and probably already is used to an extent as well, is absolutely enormous.
Yeah, it's a massive thing and nobody really knows how to navigate at the moment. So it is one of those things. You mentioned that people can generate coursework like that these days, but I'd actually like to ask you about the skills required for these up and coming sports scientists. We don't want it to just be AI and not using a brain. What do you think is essential for this next generation coming through? What would you focus on if you were that age coming through?
Yeah, good question. I think something that we've really thought hard about when we've designed our degree programme as well. Sports science traditionally, we think about it almost in three pillars, which is psychology, physiology, and biomechanics. So any sports science degree programme will have modules that you teach in those core subjects. And generally speaking, it's very much about the knowledge, so understanding how those influence an athlete and their performance, but also the practical skills to collect data to influence the athlete's performance as well. I think the bit that many sports science programs miss is what I describe as sort of personal skills, right? So if you are a sports scientist working with a group of athletes, it could be in a youth academy, you need to be able to speak to them. You have to be a good person, you have to be a good coach. Those are difficult things to teach, and many of those skills are developed by going and just doing, right? So volunteering for opportunities to go and coach a youth football team, for example, or like in our degree programme, a placement where students are required to go and work, for many months to gather the skills on site as well. But if we think about sort of those contemporary skills, so what maybe traditional programs didn't do and what we probably need to do in the future, I would say it's very much around the data processing, the data handling. So if we're going to use AI effectively, if we can teach our students how to handle that data, how to maybe undertake some basic coding to make their job easier and more efficient, then that absolutely will be something we're looking for. And again, that's something that we have as a core of our degree programme. We're actually teaching coding skills to students in their second year and their third year as well.
Those developments are crazy. That's sort of going into that stage. It's very interesting. It leads me on very nicely to my final question. I asked you about the skills required for upcoming sport and exercise scientists. What advice would you give to them? Rather than just skills, what would be your personal advice for somebody who's interested in this?
Yeah, do you know what? There's probably a couple of things, and I've been doing this for a long time now, so I suppose I've got the benefit of that experience and that hindsight to pass on to them. Probably the biggest thing I would say to them is be inquisitive. So ask questions when there's opportunities to go and listen to a guest lecturer or to go and undertake a field trip that's not a required part of your degree course. Go and do it and speak to people and try and really be tuned into what you're doing. It doesn't matter what we do, if you can develop a passion and a love for that thing, then in almost all occasions you're going to go and achieve success in what you do.
Brilliant. Chris, thank you very much for joining us on the Oriam Unlocked podcast. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.